infrastructure development. I want to focus on the economic intelligence dashboard with how the stock markets have done just today. And if you look at the intraday numbers, the Bombay Stock Exchange up 1,987. It had touched 50,000 plus. Then we'd seen some profit booking. At this moment, trading at 48,272. The Nifty 552 up, which is at 14,187. The day's highs of 14,187. 2,000 points up. The Bombay Stock Exchange is really roaring with excitement. Mir Sharma, what do you make of the way stock traders and investors have reacted to the budget announcements?
Well, I think that there are a lot of sectors in particular that will be particularly happy. I think that banks are going to be, bank stocks I believe have done well if you look at the numbers, and that's because there's some expectation of a bad bank. We'll see what the fine print again is of this proposal, but there's some hope that a bad bank will come, will emerge from these proposals and help banks clean up the balance sheet. There's a lot of hope for real estate finally after a long while because there'll be some pushes in the budget once again. There's a lot of hope for insurance, and that's the big one, right, Rahul, because there's hope that a lot of people who are stuck in the insurance sector will be able to exit with new money coming in because of 74%, which is a long delayed reform for that sector. So people are excited at the possibility essentially that the underperforming insurance sector in India will get a bit of a boost.
Okay.
And there's a lot of hope for hospital stocks as well. So there's across the board.
Speaking of the healthcare sector, I want to go across to one of the best known faces in the Indian pharma sector, biotech major Biocon, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw now joins us. Ms. Shaw, welcome. You know, huge outlay for the healthcare sector. In fact, unprecedented and historic allocations being made available. This comes in the middle of a pandemic, and therefore it was necessitated by the virus that rages, but also, you know, would you say that belatedly we are giving the kind of importance that Indian healthcare really requires?
Well, absolutely, Rahul, because I think you know, we needed to increase our investment in healthcare, and I'm glad that they've done it across the board. So a pretty hefty commitment to healthcare, which is long needed. And I also believe that, you know, this 35,000 crore for vaccines, COVID vaccines are also important. I think the whole focus on immunization has now become very strong because of the mention to pneumococcal vaccines. I also believe that, you know, there's a lot of investment in the public sector in, ecosystem in research and innovation as well. I only hope that some of it would have been, you know, given to the private sector as well, because I, for one, really felt that research and innovation ought to be also equally bolstered in the private sector. So that was what my only unmet expectation, I would say. What is also important is the focus on infrastructure, which I think is going to be important for the country. Of course, we've seen that in order to do all of this, our fiscal deficit is going to increase, but rightly so. And I would like to see how we really focus on the privatization opportunities as well as the disinvestment opportunities, because we keep talking about it, but we are never close to where we want to be.
Okay, and this huge allocation that's been made for the vaccine program, 35,000 crore rupees. Do you see that as being adequate for the next year? Would you have liked to see higher allocation, or would you actually, on the contrary, like to see the government introduce vaccines in the private sector at the earliest possible and let people who can afford to buy their own vaccines actually do so and take that load off the government's shoulders?
Absolutely, because I personally believe that we are a country where we don't have shortage of vaccines like many other countries. I think most countries are really grappling with really availability of vaccines, and we don't have that problem. So rather than let vaccines remain in the warehouses of our vaccine manufacturers, why can't we really deploy them at a very large scale and with speed? And the only way that can be done is through the private sector. So I would like to see the private sector getting into vaccine deployment as soon as possible.
Can I ask Subhash Garg his thinking on why the government isn't speeding up the process of making vaccines available in the private sector. To those who can afford to buy their own vaccines, you pay $1,000, $1,500, go to a pharmacy, get your family vaccinated. Why are we staggering and delaying the process? Kiran Shah makes an important point that unlike other countries, we've actually got in Pune and in Hyderabad more vaccines in ready available stock than are being picked up by the government.
I think this seems to be very clearly the intent to be seen that it is the government which is providing to everyone. And the credit
I like your frankness. But the fact is that, you know, it's an Indian manufactured vaccine. If it goes out, people would still be grateful that they got the vaccine. So
Rahul, we shouldn't forget that the science of vaccine itself is also progressing parallelly with the vaccination. So one has to be really careful with you know, not ending up vaccinating somebody with a product which is not necessarily the best product or not necessarily the
No, but what about everybody else who's getting the vaccine right now, all the healthcare workers?
Yeah, exactly. No, so those are frontline workers. Frontline workers
is
the first.
You have to think of the liability concept of a private entrepreneur vaccinating his person vis-a-vis the government vaccinating.
Well, it's happening in the US, it's happening in Europe. Follow the same model, build in the indemnity.
That's true, but
whether we have built in. So first primary question is, we have ordered enough vaccines, we have production access to production, but do we have the vaccines in stock? Now, do we have it enough for 2 shots? Those are the questions, and the government is being careful also. I think in a way there is what Mr. Garg said, that there is this desire to project that we are the saviors and not give the credit to any other domain. I think the secondary thing, and I would be very conscious if I was a private entrepreneur and if a private distributor, as to how the liability plays out. So in the US also, they're still drafting that indemnity thing, whether private enterprises can give. So they haven't handed over to the private guys as yet.
By the way, for the private sector also, this is very cozy, very good situation. You have a very ready market, you would be able to sell off everything, you have much lesser liability, and therefore I think it suits everyone.
The producers are actually right now worried because those who started producing and stocking these vaccines in October, their vaccines are going to expire in March. So it's a 6-month expiry in both the vaccines. So they are in race against time in some ways.
You are probably referring to that vaccine hesitancy which is coming.
Yeah.
So that can be taken care by allowing more.
But the good thing, Kiran Shah, once the government increases allocation for healthcare in this substantial fashion, almost doubling the spend on healthcare, it's then very difficult to roll back, or is it? Because once you've made a certain allocation, you can tinker with it at the margins, you can increase it a bit, you can decrease it a bit, but you can't possibly bring it down to the low levels from where we are starting out. So this could possibly be the one year where healthcare spending from the government side has really jumped and possibly stays there forever.
Has to stay there forever, Rahul. I just wanted to answer some of those comments that were being made. First and foremost, I think the people must understand that the safety of the vaccines have been established, and I think that we should not really concern ourselves with. I think what I want to make a point is that just like in the case of testing, where the private sector was able to ramp up speed and scale of testing, I think the same thing has to be done in vaccine deployment. The government system will not be able to deliver on speed and scale unless they start partnering with the private sector. That is my point.
No, I just wanted to sort of say that we understand that the testing was done, the safety, I'm not disputing the safety of it, but there is a question in the US, in Europe, in UK and in India as to if the private sector takes up, if employers take up, or if I go to, say, a nearby pharmacy and get my... So what is the picture? You would probably know this. What is the picture on liability? I mean, the long-term liability of vaccine use. The testing establishes safety and efficiency. We still don't have data to say what it will look like after a year or 2 years or 10 years.
Yeah, but please understand, this is it is a voluntary process. People know the risks associated, and I think we should not just let the government decide for a person whether they need to be vaccinated or not. I think we must understand that there is a risk reward in this, and those who want to be vaccinated, and especially corporates who are willing to vaccinate their employees.
Yeah.
I think we must look at all these aspects. And I think just getting the frontline workers to be vaccinated and then wait for 2 years before others can be vaccinated in a general way is not the ideal solution.
Absolutely,
So
but no, absolutely, Ms. Shaw.
We have to make sure that we expedite vaccination, and since it is a voluntary process, I don't think we should worry about it.
No, we are on the same page. I am just wondering whether there is an issue of indemnity that is in somewhere on the page.
Most countries have basically indemnified the companies because of the fact that these vaccines have been developed at warp speed, and therefore they believe that it is not fair to not indemnify the companies unless there is a manufacturing related problem. Because really, at this point in time, it's very difficult to hold them responsible.
Okay, Kiran Shaw, we'll come back to you later. Thank you very much for your opening comments. I'm also seeing, as we pour through the budget fine print, that the allocations for sectors like Manrega, the allocation for the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Program has actually been slashed quite dramatically up to 40-odd%. We'll get into that because if there's been a big increase in outlay for the healthcare sector, for roadways, for railways, there have been cuts elsewhere. Where have those cuts happened? It wasn't focused on very naturally in the finance minister's budget, but now that the budget papers are available, we'll try and dissect and bring that out for you when we come back on the other side of a quick break. You're watching India Today's live and continuing coverage of Coronanomics. Our coverage continues on the other side of this break. Stay with us.